Today I'm going to read a passage from The King of the World by Rene Guenon. This will be chapter 8. The Supreme Center Concealed During the Kali Yuga. Agartha, it is said, was not in fact always underground and will not always remain so. According to Ossendowski's report, a time will come when the people of Agartha will come up from their subterranean caverns to the surface of the earth before its disappearance from the visible world. This center bore another name for Agartha, which means imperceptible or inaccessible, and also inviolable, since it is Salem, the abode of peace, and would not yet have been appropriate. Ossendowski clearly states that it withdrew underground more than 6,000 years ago, indicating thereby a date which, as it happens, very closely approximate the beginning of the Kali Yuga, or Dark Age, the Iron Age of the ancient West, which is the last of the four periods into which the Manvantara is divided. Its appearance is to coincide with the beginning of this same period. We have already mentioned the allusions to all traditions to something that is lost or hidden, which is represented under various symbols, taken in the general sense, that concerns terrestrial humanity as a whole. This loss corresponds precisely to the conditions of humanity during the Kali Yuga. The present period is therefore one of obscuration and confusion. Its conditions are such that, as long as they endure, initiatic knowledge must necessarily remain hidden. And this explains the character of the mysteries of historical antiquity, which in fact it does not even reach back to the beginning of this period and the secret societies of all peoples. Such organizations transmit an effective initiation wherever true traditional doctrine still subsists, but offers no more than its pale shadow when the spirit of this doctrine has ceased to vivify the symbols that are only its outward representation. This happens when, for various reasons, all conscious connection with the spiritual center of the world has finally been broken. This is the more particular meaning of the loss of tradition as concerns specific secondary centers, which consist in a rupture of effective relations with the Supreme Center. Thus, we have already said, one should speak of something that is hidden rather than of something truly lost, for it is not lost to everyone, and some few still possess it in its integrity, and if such is the case, others always have the possibility of recovering it, provided they search for it in the right way, which is to say that their intention must be directed as that through the harmonious vibrations it awakens, according to the law of concordant actions and reactions. They are enabled to establish an effective spiritual communication with the Supreme Center in all traditional forms. This directing of the attention is, moreover, always symbolically represented by ritual orientation. Probably speaking, the latter is in fact the directions towards some spiritual center, which, no matter what particular center it may be, it is always an image of the true center of the world. But the further the Kali Yuga progresses, the more difficult it becomes to establish contact with this center, which becomes increasingly more closed and hidden at the same time that these secondary centers representing it externally becomes increasingly more rare. Yet when this period comes to an end, the tradition will be manifested anew in its integrality, in the beginning of each Manvantara coinciding with the end of the preceding one, necessarily implies for terrestrial humanity the return to the primordial state. In Europe, every consciously established link with the center by means of regular organizations is now broken, and this has been so for several centuries. Moreover, this rupture was not accomplished all at once, but in many successful stages. The first stage dates from the beginning of the 14th century. What we have already said elsewhere makes it understandable that one of the principal roles of the orders of chivalry was to assure communication between East and West, the true importance of which will be readily grasped when it is recalled that the center here in question has always been depicted as located somewhere in the East, at least with the respect to the historical times. Nevertheless, after the destruction of the Order of the Templars, the Brother of the Holy Cross, of the Rose Cross, or what was later to be given that name, continued to assure the same communication, albeit in a more hidden way. The Renaissance and the Reformation marked a new critical phase, after which, as St. Ives appears to suggest, came the complete and final rupture, coinciding with the treaties of Westphalia that in 1648 ended with the 30 Years' War. Now it is remarkable that the numerous writers have affirmed precisely that the true brotherhood of the Rose Cross left Europe shortly after the 30 Years' War to withdraw into Asia, and in this regard we recall that the Rosicrucian adepts were 12 in number, as were the members of the inner circle of Agartha, in conformity with the constitution common to so many other spiritual centers formed in the image of that supreme center. Since this last period, the deposit of effective initiatic knowledge has not truly been preserved by any Western organization. Thus Swedenborg declared that the lost word must henceforth be sought among the sages of Tibet and of Tartary, and according to the visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich, the mysterious place that she calls the Mountain of Prophets is also set in the same regions. And let us add that the fragmentary information Madame Blavatsky was able to gather on this subject, though without fully understanding its true significance, gave rise to her idea of the Great White Lodge, which we would call not an image, but quite simply a caricature or fanciful parody of Agartha. I guess I could read one more. Chapter 9, the Amphallos and Sacred Stones. According to Avsendowski's report, the King of the World formerly appeared several times in India and in Siam, and blessed the people with a golden apple and a figure of a lamb above it, and this detail takes on great importance when compared with what St. Ives says of the cycle of the lamb and the ram. From another point of view, it is even more remarkable that in Christian symbolism there exists innumerable representations of the lamb on a mountain from which flow 4 rivers that are clearly identical with the 4 rivers of the terrestrial paradise. Now we have said that Agartha bore a different name prior to the onset of the Kali Yuga, and that name was Paradesha, which in Sanskrit means supreme country, and which applies well to the spiritual center par excellence, also called the heart of the world. It is from this word that the Christians formed Pardes and the Westerners paradise. The Chaldeans formed Pardes and the Westerners paradise. Such is the original meaning of this latter, which should make clear why we said before that in one form or another it always signifies the same thing as the Pardes of the Hebrew Kabbalah. Moreover, referring back to what was said earlier concerning the symbolism of the pole, it is also easy to see that the mountain of the terrestrial paradise is identical with the solar mountain, which under various names exists in almost all traditions. We have already mentioned the Meru of the Hindus and the Alborz of the Persians, as well as the Montsalvat of the Western legend of the Grail. There are also the mountain Kaf of the Arabs and the Greek Olympus, which in many ways have the same significance. The region in question is always more like the terrestrial paradise, has become inaccessible to ordinary humanity, and lies beyond the reach of all cataclysms that rack the human world at the end of certain cyclical periods. This region is the veritable supreme country. Moreover, according to certain Vedic and Avestan texts, its location must originally have been polar, even in the literal sense of the word, and whatever its location may have been during the different phases of human history, it always remains polar in the symbolic sense, for it essentially represents the fixed axis around which the revolution of all things is accomplished. The mountain naturally represents the center of the world. Moreover, the onset of the Kali Yuga, that is to say, when it existed openly as it were, and was not yet subterranean, and it thus corresponded to what might be called its normal position, apart from the period of obscuration, the particular conditions of which imply a sort of reversal of the established order. It must also be added that, apart from these considerations referring to cyclical laws, the symbols of the mountain and the cave each have their own raison d'être and are truly complementary. Moreover, the castle may be envisaged as located in the interior of the mountain itself, or as immediately beneath it. There are still other symbols in ancient tradition that represent the center of the world, one of the most remarkable perhaps being the amphallos, which is likely found among nearly all peoples. In the Greek word umbilicus, or navel, but it also designates in a general way all that is central, and in particular the hub of a wheel in Sanskrit. The word nabhi has the same connotations as do the various words in the Celtic and Germanic languages derived from the same root, which is then found under the forms nab and nav. In Welsh, on the other hand, the word nav, or nav with a single f, which is obviously related to the forms just mentioned, carries the sense of chief, and is sometimes often replied to as God. And so it is indeed the idea of the central principle that is being expressed here. The meaning hub has besides a very particular importance in this regard, because the wheel is everywhere, a symbol of the world, accomplishing its rotation around a fixed point, a symbol that must thus be compared to the swastika. But in the latter, the circumference representing manifestation is not depicted, so that it is the center itself that is expressly pointed to. The swastika then being not a representation of the world, but rather of the action of the principle in relation to the world. The symbol of the amphallos could be situated in a place that was simply the center of a determined region, the spiritual center, of course, rather than the geographical one. Although in certain cases the one might coincide in case where the latter held true, this was because for the people who inhabited the region in question, the place concerned was truly the visible image of the center of the world, just as the tradition proper to that people was only an adaptation of the primordial tradition, expressed in a form that best fitted its mentality and its conditions of existence. The amphallos that is best known is the one in the temple at Delphi, which was quite certainly the spiritual center of all ancient Greece. And without dwelling on all the reasons that could justify the assertion, we will only note that it was at Delphi that the twice yearly council of the Amphictyons assembled. This council was composed of representatives from all the Hellenic peoples, and moreover formed the only effective link between these peoples, the strength of which link lay in its essentially traditional character. The physical representation of the amphallos was generally a sacred stone, commonly called a baitil, a word that seems to be none other than the Hebrew Beth El, or house of God, the name given by Jacob to the place where the Lord appeared to him in a dream. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone which he had put under his head, and set up a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. He called the name of the place Bethel, Beth El, but the name of the city was Luz at first. We have explained the meaning of the word Luz above. Moreover, it is said that Beth El, the house of God, later became Bethlehem, the house of bread, which is the city where Christ was born, and the symbolic relationship existing between stone and bread is moreover most worthy of attention. We should point out that his name Beth El applies not only to the place but to the stone itself, and this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's house. So it is this stone that must be the true divine habitation, Mishkan, according to the designation given later to the tabernacle, that is the seat of the Shekinah. All this is naturally connected to the subject of the spiritual influence, the Barakoth. And when we speak of the cult of stones that was common to so many ancient peoples, it must be understood that this cult was not addressed to the stones themselves, but to the divinity whose dwelling place they were. The stone representing the amphallos could take the form of a pillar like a stone of Yakub, and it's quite probable that among the Celtic peoples certain menhirs had the same significance, and the oracles were uttered close by these stones, as at Delphi, which is easily explained by the fact that they were considered to be the dwelling place of the divinity, the house of God, being moreover quite naturally identified with the centre of the world. The amphallos could also be represented in the form of a cone, like the black stone of Cybele, or of an ovoid, the cone recalling the sacred mountain symbol of the pole or world axis, and the ovoid form relating directly to another very important symbol, the world egg. It should be added that the amphallos, although unusually represented by a stone, sometimes took the form of a mound, or sort of tumulus, which again it is a symbol of the sacred mountain. Thus in China, for example, a mound in the shape of a quadrilateral pyramid and formed from the earth of the 5 regions was formerly raised in the center of every kingdom or feudal state. The 4 faces corresponded to the 4 cardinal points, and its summit to the center itself. Strangely enough, these 5 regions are also to be found in Ireland, where the standing stone of the chieftain was raised in a similar way at the center of each domain. Among the Celtic nation, it is in fact Ireland that furnishes the most information relative to the amphallos. The country was formerly divided into 5 kingdoms, of which one bore the name Mide, still extant in its anglicized form, Meath, from the ancient Celtic word Midian, middle, identical with the Latin Midius. The kingdom of Mide, which had been formed of portions of land appropriated from the other kingdoms, became the rightful appanage of Ireland's supreme king, to whom the other kings were subordinate. At Ushnag, situated almost exactly at the center of the country, there stood a gigantic stone called the Navel of the Earth, also called the Stone of Portions, Eilna Miran, because it marked the place where the dividing boundaries of the 4 original kingdoms converged with the kingdom of Mide. On the first day of May each year, a general assembly was held there, very like the annual union of the Druids at their central consecrated place, Medio Lamon or Medio Nematon in Gaul, in the land of the Carnutes, the similarity here with the assembly of the Amphictyons at Delphi being evident. This division of Ireland into 4 kingdoms, together with the central region where its supreme ruler resided, is linked to very ancient traditions. It was indeed for this reason that Ireland was called the Isle of the 4 Masters, but this name, as well as that of the Green Isle, Erin, had previously been applied to another far more northerly land called Ogygia, or rather Thule, now unknown and perhaps vanished, but once more the principal spiritual centers, if even the supreme one during a certain period. The memory of this Isle of 4 Masters is also found as far away as China, although this seems never to have noticed before, as witnessed by this Taoist text. The Emperor Yao took a great deal of trouble, and sincerely believed he had reigned in an ideal way. However, after his visit to the 4 Masters in the distant Isle of Kushe, inhabited by true men, Chen Zhen, that is to say, those who have been reintegrated into the primordial state, he realized that he had spoiled everything. The ideal he discovered that consists of the indifference, or rather the attachment and activity, that is the non-action of the superior man, who allows the cosmic wheel to turn. From another point of view, the 4 masters are identified with the 4 Maharajas, or great kings, who in the Hindu and in Tibetan traditions preside over the 4 cardinal points, corresponding at the same time to the elements, where the Supreme Master, the 5th, who resides at the center on the sacred mountain, represents the ether, akasha, the quintessence or quinta essentia of the Hermeticists, which is the primal element from which the other 4 proceed, and analogous traditions are also to be found in Central America. And those were chapters 8 and 9 of The King of the World by Rene Guénon. I will be back next time. See you later. For now.